December winds in the Arizona Territory didn't whisper, they howled. Up on the Mogollon Rim, where the ponderosa pines grew thick and the altitude turned winter into a white-knuckled test of survival, the wind carved through flesh like a skinning knife. On the morning of December 14, 1877, that wind carried something it hadn't carried in 5 years, the sound of another human voice. Jacob Thornton didn't hear it at first. He was too focused on the rabbit snare he was checking, his massive hands working the wire with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his appearance. At 39 years old, Jacob stood 6'3" in his moccasins, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk. His beard, thick and dark as bear fur, hung halfway down his chest. His hair, equally wild, touched his shoulders. The Army scouts who'd worked with him before he quit called him Bear, and the name fit. He moved through the high country like something that had always been there, something the mountains had carved from their own stone and breathed life into. He'd been alone on this mountain for 5 years now, ever since the smallpox took Martha and their boy, ever since the day he'd buried them both under the big ponderosa near the cabin and decided that silence was better than the sound of a world that could steal everything from you in a single fevered week. The tracks stopped him cold. Jacob knelt in the snow, his breath pluming in the crystalline air. The print was small, delicate even, and unmistakably human. But what made his jaw tighten was this. It was bare. No boot, no moccasin, just the impression of 5 toes and a narrow heel pressed into 4 inches of fresh powder. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees before dawn. Nobody walked barefoot in this cold unless they were running from something worse than frostbite. He studied the track with eyes that had learned to read ground the way scholars read books. The depth of impression told him weight, around 120 pounds. The stride length told him speed, moving fast but controlled. The slight drag on the right foot told him injury, and the direction told him trouble, heading northeast toward the box canyon where the old cavalry patrol route cut through. Then he heard it. The crack of a rifle shot, flat and sharp in the thin air, followed by a sound he hadn't heard in half a decade. A woman's scream, abruptly cut off. Jacob's hand went to the Sharp's rifle slung across his back. 5 years of choosing silence over society. 5 years of deciding that his grief was companion enough. And now this. He could turn around. He could walk back to his cabin, bank the fire, and pretend he'd heard nothing but wind in the pines. He started running instead. His long legs ate up the distance, boots finding purchase on ice-slick stones without thought. The tracks led him through a stand of juniper, across a frozen creek, up a ridge where the wind had scoured the snow down to bare rock. Half a mile in, he smelled it, the acrid tang of gunpowder still fresh in the cold air. The canyon opened before him, and there they were, 3 men, rough-looking characters with the kind of faces that told you they'd crossed lines decent people wouldn't approach. They wore heavy coats and gun belts, and between them they were dragging something. Someone. A woman, hands bound behind her back with rope, being pulled across the snow like a deer carcass. Jacob dropped behind a boulder, bringing the Sharps up to his shoulder. Through the gun sight, he could see her clearly now. Apache, no question about it. Even from 70 yards, he recognized the build, the high cheekbones, the way she held herself despite the rope and the blood on her lip. She was fighting. Not screaming, not begging, just throwing her weight against the rope every 3rd step, making them work for every inch they dragged her. The nearest man backhanded her across the face. "Hold still, you savage!" The woman spat blood at his feet. Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger. 3 men. He could drop 2 before they knew what hit them. The 3rd would be a problem, but problems were what the Bowie knife on his hip was for. Simple mathematics, simple justice. But then the middleman spoke, and Jacob's blood went cold. 50 yards more, boys. Pike said to bring her to the meeting point alive. Colonel Blackwood wants her real particular. Colonel Silas Blackwood, Indian agent at San Carlos Reservation. Jacob knew that name the way a man knows the name of a rattlesnake that bit him once. 3 years ago, when the Army was still trying to round up the last free Apache bands, Blackwood had ordered a dawn raid on a peaceful encampment. 17 dead, mostly women and children. The official report called it a regrettable exchange of fire. Jacob, who'd been scouting for the Army at the time, called it murder and turned in his resignation the same day. And now Blackwood wanted this woman, which meant she either knew something or had something he couldn't let get out. Jacob made his decision. Not the smart one, not the safe one, but the only one he could live with. He stepped out from behind the boulder, rifle raised. His voice, unused for days, came out like gravel rolling downhill. "Let her go." The 3 men spun around, hands dropping to their gun belts. The one who'd been doing the talking, a lean man with a scarred cheek and eyes like dirty ice, smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Well now," he said, "Mountain Man wants to play hero. You know there's a $500 bounty on this squaw?" Jacob didn't lower the rifle. "I know you got about 3 seconds to cut that rope before I put a hole in you big enough to see daylight through." The scarred man's smile widened. "That's hostile talk, friend. Real hostile. Name's Luther Pike, and I work for the Colonel. Legal work. This here Apache killed 3 soldiers down at San Carlos. We got a warrant." "Then you won't mind showing it to me." "Don't need to show you nothing." Jacob's next shot took Pike's hat clean off his head. The report echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Pike stumbled backward, hand going to his bare scalp, eyes wide with shock. "Next one goes lower," Jacob said, already levering another round into the chamber. "Your choice." For a moment, everything hung suspended. 4 men, 3 guns, 1 woman, and the weight of a decision that would ripple out in ways none of them could see. Then Pike's hand moved. He was fast. Jacob gave him that. But Jacob had spent 5 years alone on this mountain with nothing to do but practice, and his rifle spoke first. The bullet took Pike in the shoulder, spinning him around. The other 2 men grabbed for their guns, but they were too slow, too surprised, too focused on the madman with the sharps who'd just shot their leader. Jacob dropped the rifle and charged. He hit the first man like an avalanche, 300 pounds of mountain-hardened muscle and momentum. They went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. Jacob's fist, big as a ham, caught the man square in the jaw. The crack echoed off the rocks. The man went limp. The second one pulled a knife. 8 inches of steel, wicked sharp, and aimed right at Jacob's ribs. Jacob caught the wrist, twisted, and the knife tumbled into the snow. Then his head came forward, and the headbutt that followed had every ounce of rage he'd been storing up for 5 years behind it. The man's nose shattered. He dropped like a felled tree. But in the chaos, everyone had forgotten about the woman. Pike was on his knees, one hand clutching his bleeding shoulder, the other fumbling for his pistol. He got it clear of the holster, brought it up toward Jacob's back. His finger tightened on the trigger. The woman, hands still bound, launched herself off the ground and drove both feet into Pike's knee. The joint bent sideways with a sound like a green branch snapping. Pike's scream tore across the canyon. The pistol fired wild, the bullet whining off into empty sky. Jacob spun around just in time to see the woman roll to her feet with an agility that shouldn't have been possible with bound hands and bleeding feet. She stood over Pike, breathing hard, eyes blazing with something that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite rage. Something colder, something that looked like justice measured out in pain. Pike looked up at her, clutching his ruined knee, face gray with shock. "You Indian witch," he gasped. "Colonel's gonna hang you slow." The woman leaned down, and when she spoke her English was perfect, unaccented, and colder than the wind. "Tell your colonel that Morning Star is coming for him, and I'm bringing the truth." Then she looked at Jacob, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were black as obsidian and just as sharp. They took in his size, his rifle, his wild appearance, and came to some conclusion he couldn't read. "You have a knife?" she asked. Jacob pulled the bowie from his belt and held it out handle first. She took it, turned around, and stretched her bound hands toward him. He cut the rope with 2 quick strokes. She rubbed her wrists, never taking her eyes off the three men groaning in the snow. "You're bleeding," Jacob said, nodding at her feet. She glanced down as if noticing for the first time that she'd left a trail of red footprints across the white snow. "I can walk." "Not far. Not in this cold." "Farther than you think." There it was, that Apache pride he'd seen before, the kind of pride that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees, the kind that made the army spend 30 years trying to subdue a people who simply refused to be subdued. Jacob pulled off his boots. They were elk hide, lined with rabbit fur, and 3 sizes too big for her. He held them out. She looked at the boots, then at him, suspicion clear in every line of her face. "Why?" "Because you need them. I don't take charity from whites." "Good," Jacob said, "because this ain't charity. This is common sense. You freeze to death out here, all your running was for nothing." She studied him for a long moment. Then, with visible reluctance, she took the boots. They swallowed her feet, but she laced them tight. Jacob noticed she moved with practiced efficiency, no wasted motion. Whoever she was, she'd done hard living before. "My cabin's 2 miles west," he said. "You can warm up, get food. Then you can tell me why Colonel Blackwood wants you dead." "You know Blackwood?" "Know of him. Know enough." She looked at the 3 men in the snow. Pike was conscious but in no shape to follow anyone. The other 2 were still out cold. "They'll send more." "Let them. I know every trail on this mountain. They don't." For the first time, something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You're not afraid?" Jacob thought about Martha's grave under the ponderosa, thought about 5 years of silence and snow, thought about the fact that for the first time since the fever took everything, he felt something other than numb. "I'm too old to be afraid," he said, "and too tired to watch injustice happen in front of me. Now come on, storm's coming in, and I got coffee at the cabin." They walked in silence, Jacob in his wool socks on snow-covered ground, the woman in his oversized boots moving with surprising grace. After 10 minutes, she spoke. "My name is Kainai. It means morning star in my language. Jacob, people used to call me Bear. I can see why." She paused, then added, "Thank you, Bear, for what you did back there." "Don't thank me yet," Jacob said, scanning the tree line with practiced eyes. "You got men hunting you, and I just made myself part of whatever trouble you're running from. So before we get to that cabin, I need to know, what's Blackwood afraid of?" Kainai reached into the doeskin pouch hanging at her waist. She pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, its pages thick with cramped handwriting. Even from 2 feet away, Jacob could see columns of numbers, dates, names. "This," she said simply. "He's afraid of this." They reached the cabin just as the first flakes of new snow began to fall. It was a solid structure, built from ponderosa logs and chinked with mud and moss. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. Through the single window, Jacob could see the orange glow of banked coals in the fireplace. Home, such as it was. He pushed open the door and gestured for Kainai to enter. She stepped inside, and he watched her eyes move across the space, taking in the rifle rack on the wall, the provisions stacked neatly on shelves, the bearskin rug, the small wooden horse carved with loving care sitting on the mantel. Her gaze lingered on the horse for a moment before moving to the inscription carved into the timber above the fireplace, MT 1870. "Your wife?" she asked quietly. "Was." She touched the medicine pouch at her waist, and Jacob saw something flicker across her face. Recognition. Shared loss. "Mine too. My husband, 6 months ago. Cavalry patrol near the Gila River." They stood there in the warm cabin, 2 people carved hollow by grief, and between them hung a understanding that needed no words. Sometimes you didn't need to explain pain to someone. Sometimes they could just see it in the way you held yourself, the way your eyes went somewhere else when you thought nobody was watching. Jacob broke the moment by stirring the fire to life and hanging a pot of coffee over it. "You hungry?" "Always." "Got venison stew. Made it 2 days ago, should still be good." While Jacob worked at the stove, Kainai moved around the cabin with the careful attention of someone assessing escape routes and defensive positions. She checked the window latch, tested the strength of the door bar, examined the firing angles from both corners. It was the behavior of someone who'd survived by staying alert. "You were a warrior's wife," Jacob observed. "I was. Nashota, best tracker in our band. Could read ground like white men read their newspapers." She smiled, a real smile this time, soft with memory. "He taught me everything. How to move without sound, how to read weather in the clouds, how to survive when survival seemed impossible." Sounds like a good man. He was. Until a lieutenant decided our camp was too close to a settler's farm and opened fire at dawn. Nashota died covering our retreat. 17 of us escaped that day. 37 didn't. Jacob's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories like this before. Too many stories. Blackwood's work? His orders, his decisions, his profit. She pulled out the notebook again and opened it to a page covered in neat script. "I worked in his office at San Carlos. Cleaned, cooked, pretended I didn't understand English. They talk freely around servants. Think we're too stupid to matter. But you listened." "I listened. And I wrote. Every conversation, every bribe, every shipment of supplies that was supposed to go to reservation families but went to merchants in Tucson instead. Every blanket that was stolen, every bag of flour that disappeared, every young woman who was sent to school and never came back." Jacob took the notebook, careful with its fragile pages. His eyes scanned the entries. December 3rd, 1877, 50 blankets listed in manifest, only 10 delivered to families. Remaining 40 sold to Harrison Mercantile, Tucson. Payment to Blackwood, $300. November 20th, 1877, medical supplies rerouted to Phoenix. Apache children with winter fever denied treatment. 4 deaths recorded. The entries went on. Page after page of systematic theft, corruption, and cruelty. Each line represented suffering. Each number meant a hungry child, a sick elder, a family freezing in inadequate housing while Blackwood grew rich. But it was the last section that made Jacob's blood run cold. A list of names, all female, all Apache, ranging in age from 13 to 20. Next to each name, a date, a destination, and a price. Mary Running Deer, 14 years old, sent to Phoenix School for Girls, November 12th. Price, $200. Status, school reports, no arrival. "He's not just stealing supplies," Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's selling people." "Children," Kainai corrected, and her voice could have cut glass. "Young girls. He tells their families they're going to get education, better lives. The families believe him because what choice do they have? Then the girls disappear. Some to brothels, some to labor camps, some just vanish." Jacob closed the notebook with hands that wanted to shake. "How many? This year? 19? Last year? 23? The year before?" "I don't have those records, but a woman at the reservation, Sarah Running Deer, she's been tracking the disappeared. She thinks over 100 girls in the last 5 years. "And you have proof?" "In that book. Names, dates, amounts, receipts I copied, letters I found. Everything a judge would need to hang Colonel Silas Blackwood for trafficking, theft, and murder." Jacob walked to the window and looked out at the falling snow. In the distance, through the white curtain, he could see the first hints of twilight gathering. "Fort Apache is 60 miles northeast. Captain Hayes is stationed there. He's honest. Rare in the Army these days, but honest. If we can get this to him, Blackwood's finished." "If," Kainai said. "Pike knows I'm heading to Fort Apache. He'll have men on every trail. And Blackwood has friends, Army officers who owe him favors, marshals who take his money. Even if we reach Fort Apache, who says Hayes will believe an Apache woman and a mountain hermit over a colonel?" "Because the truth doesn't care who speaks it," Jacob said. It's still the truth. Before Kainai could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside. Fast, urgent, coming up the trail at speed. Jacob grabbed his rifle, but Kainai put a hand on his arm. Wait. One horse. If it was Pike's men, there'd be more. The rider came into view through the falling snow. An old man on a spotted mule, white beard flying behind him like a banner. Tom Sullivan, called Red by everyone on the mountain, the nearest thing Jacob had to a neighbor. He lived 10 miles down the ridge and made his living panning for gold in the summer streams. Red pulled up outside, breathing hard. "Bear, you in there?" Jacob opened the door. "What's wrong?" "Army patrol came through my place an hour ago, looking for an Apache woman. Said she killed 3 soldiers at San Carlos. Said there's a $500 bounty, and they're bringing dogs up from Tucson to track her." Red's eyes found Kainai standing in the shadows. "That her?" "She didn't kill anyone," Jacob said. "She's a witness to crimes. Blackwood wants her dead before she can talk." Red took that in, his weathered face thoughtful. He'd lived in the territory for 40 years, long enough to know the difference between Army justice and Army lies. "Well, they're spreading word in every mining camp and trading post. By tomorrow, every 2-bit bounty hunter from here to Prescott will be heading up this mountain." Kainai stepped forward, and even in oversized boots and blood-stained clothes, she carried herself with the dignity of a queen. "I should go. You've done enough, Bear. I won't bring more trouble to your door." Jacob looked at her, then at Red, then at the notebook sitting on his table. He thought about Martha, about the boy who'd never grown up to carve his own horses. He thought about 5 years of silence and snow, of a life that had been about nothing but surviving until tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and then tomorrow. And he made his choice. "Sit down," he said to Kainai. Then to Red, "Tell anyone who asks that you saw Apache tracks heading south toward the Salt River. Tell them she's running for Mexico." Red's eyes narrowed. "You sure about this, Bear? Blackwood's a powerful man. You cross him, you'll have more than bounty hunters to worry about." "I'm sure." "Then I hope you got plenty of ammunition, because you're going to need it." Red tipped his hat to Kainai. "Ma'am, whatever you got on Blackwood, I hope it's worth dying for." "It is," she said simply. After Red left, Jacob began methodically checking rifles, counting bullets, assessing supplies. Kainai watched him for a moment, then spoke. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe my people anything. You could tell Pike where I went, collect that bounty, go back to your quiet life." Jacob looked up from the rifle he was loading. In the firelight, his eyes were the color of smoke. 5 years ago, I quit the Army because I couldn't stomach another massacre. Told myself I was done with other people's problems. Told myself that staying alone, staying quiet, was the right choice. He set the rifle down and met her gaze. "But a man can lie to himself only so long. You're not running because you want to. You're running because staying means death, or worse. And that notebook you're carrying represents justice for people who've had none for too long. So, no, I don't know you. And no, I don't owe your people anything. But I owe it to myself to be the kind of man who doesn't turn away when right and wrong are standing plain in front of me." Kainai studied him in the flickering light. Then slowly she nodded. "Nashota would have liked you." "Yeah?" "He always said the best warriors were the ones who fought for others, not for glory." She touched the medicine pouch at her waist. "I should tell you, if Blackwood's men find us here, they won't take prisoners. They can't afford to let either of us reach Fort Apache alive." "Then we better make sure they don't find us," Jacob said. He walked to the door and dropped the heavy oak bar into place. The sound echoed through the cabin like a judge's gavel. "Tonight, nobody gets through that door unless they go through me first. Tomorrow, we figure out how to get you and that notebook to Captain Hayes. Deal?" For the first time since he'd found her being dragged across the snow, Kainai smiled. A real smile, warm and fierce and full of hope. Deal. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering tracks, burying evidence, turning the world into a blank page. Somewhere down the mountain, Luther Pike was nursing a shattered knee and wounded pride, plotting revenge. Somewhere in San Carlos, Colonel Blackwood was receiving word that his problem had found protection. And somewhere between the cabin and Fort Apache, a reckoning was building like storm clouds on the horizon. But inside the warm cabin, two people who'd been running from different kinds of pain found something they'd both lost: purpose. And sometimes purpose is the only thing that stands between survival and surrender. The game had begun. The stakes were life and death. And Jacob Thornton, who'd chosen silence and solitude 5 years ago, had just chosen something different. He'd chosen to fight. Not for glory, not for money, but for the simple, unshakable truth that some things are worth the risk. Some battles are worth fighting, and some people are worth saving, even if it costs you everything. The snow fell, the fire burned, and two survivors became something more. They became allies, and in the morning, when the sun rose over the Mogollon Rim, they'd face whatever came together. Dawn came to the Mogollon Rim like a knife blade, sharp and cold and unforgiving. Jacob woke to the sound of silence, which was wrong. Birds should have been calling. Wind should have been moving through the pines. But there was nothing, just that heavy quiet that meant something was watching, something was waiting. He rolled off the bearskin rug where he'd slept, rifle already in hand before his eyes were fully open. 5 years alone had taught him that hesitation was how you died. Across the room, Kainai was already awake, crouched by the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. 300 yards, she whispered without turning around. 5 men, maybe 6, spread out in a line through the trees. Jacob moved to join her, impressed despite himself. His eyes were good, trained by years of hunting, but he had to squint to make out the shapes she'd already counted. Dark forms moving between the ponderosas, trying to use the early morning shadows for cover. "Pike's men?" he asked. "Some, but the one in front, that's not Pike. Different walk, more patient." She glanced at him, and he saw something flicker in those obsidian eyes. Not fear, recognition. That's a real tracker, someone who knows what he's doing. Jacob studied the lead figure, tall, lean, moving with the kind of economy that spoke of long experience. The man stopped, knelt, examined something in the snow. Even from this distance, Jacob could see the deliberation in every movement. This wasn't some trigger-happy bounty hunter. This was a professional. "Luther Pike's got a partner," Jacob said, memory stirring. "Man named Drummond. Used to scout for Crook during the Apache campaigns. Good at his job, which is why he's still alive when most of Crook's scouts aren't." "Drummond?" Kainai repeated the name like she was tasting poison. "I know this name. At San Carlos, when they needed someone found, Blackwood would send for Drummond. He found a family hiding in the Superstition Mountains. Found 2 girls who ran from the reservation. Always found them." Her jaw tightened. "And always brought them back in chains." The line of men had stopped now, 200 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. They weren't advancing, just watching, waiting for something. "They're testing us," Jacob said, "seeing if we'll panic and run or shoot and give away our positions." "What do we do?" "We let them wonder." Jacob moved away from the window and started checking his weapons. 3 rifles, all loaded, 2 pistols, the big Bowie knife, powder and shot enough for a sustained fight, but not an endless one. "They know we're in here. Question is, do they know what they're walking into?" Kainai left the window and joined him at the gun rack. She moved with that same fluid grace he'd noticed yesterday, despite the oversized boots and the cuts on her feet. "You have another rifle? Can you shoot?" Her look could have melted snow. "My husband taught me. Said a woman who couldn't defend herself was a woman who'd die young." She picked up the Winchester, checked the action with practiced hands, sighted down the barrel. "This is good, balanced. You take care of your weapons." "Only things I got left to take care of." They fell into preparation without discussing it, moving around each other like dancers who knew the steps. Kainai suggested positioning the heavy oak table on its side near the window, creating a firing position with good cover. Jacob added to it, stacking firewood for additional protection. She pointed out the blind spot near the door where someone could approach unseen. He showed her the loose floorboard where he kept extra ammunition. "At San Carlos," Kainai said as she worked, "when the cavalry would come for troublemakers, we learned to prepare like this. Windows blocked, escape routes planned, everything that could be a weapon within reach." She wedged a cast-iron skillet into a gap in the barricade. "They taught us to be ready, even when ready wasn't enough." Jacob was about to respond when the sound came. Not a shot, but a voice, amplified and carrying across the frozen distance. "Thornton! Jacob Thornton! I know you're in there!" The speaker was the tall tracker, Drummond, standing now in plain sight at the tree line. He held no weapon, just a piece of paper that fluttered in the morning wind. "I got a legal warrant here for the Apache woman." Drummond's voice bounced off the canyon walls. "Murder of 3 United States soldiers. You're harboring a fugitive, Thornton. That makes you an accessory. Send her out and you walk away clean." Jacob stayed behind cover, not responding. Kainai's hand found his arm, a question in her touch. "He's lying," Jacob said quietly, "trying to split us up, make me think I can save myself by giving you up." "Are you sure?" He looked at her, this Apache woman he'd known for less than a day, who'd already saved his life once and whose courage put most men to shame. "I'm sure." "Last chance, Thornton," Drummond called. "Colonel Blackwood's prepared to be generous. $500 for the woman, and you get to keep breathing. That's more than fair." Jacob made his decision. He moved to the door, opened it just wide enough to be heard, and let his voice roll out across the snow like thunder. "Show me that warrant, Drummond. Bring it here so I can read it proper." A pause. Then, "Don't need to show you nothing." "That's what I thought." Jacob's laugh was harsh, without humor. "You got no warrant. Just Blackwood's orders and blood money. Well, here's my answer." He raised the sharps and fired. The shot was perfect, threading between trees and men, close enough to make them flinch but hitting nothing but air. A warning, a statement, a line drawn in the snow that said, "This far and no farther." For a moment, everything hung suspended. Then Drummond's arm swept down in a signal, and the canyon erupted in gunfire. Bullets hammered into the cabin walls, chewing splinters from the logs, shattering one of the shutters, whining through the air like angry hornets. Jacob and Kainai dropped behind their barricade as the world turned into noise and chaos and the sharp smell of gunpowder. "Count their shots," Jacob shouted over the din. "They can't reload and advance at the same time." Kainai was already doing it, her lips moving silently. When the firing slowed, when the pause came that meant empty chambers and fumbling hands, she rose like a ghost and fired. Once, twice, 3 times. Precise shots, not wasted, each one forcing a man behind cover. Jacob added his own fire, the big sharps booming like a cannon. He wasn't trying to kill. Not yet. Just make them understand that taking this cabin would cost more than Blackwood was paying. The attack lasted 10 minutes that felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost as loud as the gunfire had been. Drummond's voice came again, different now, respectful, wary. "You're better than I figured, Thornton. But you can't win this. We got men, supplies, and time. What do you got?" "Everything I need," Jacob called back. Then, quieter, to Kainai, "How many did you count?" 6 for certain, maybe 7. One of them hit, I think. Saw him dragging left leg when they pulled back. Good shooting. Good teaching." She checked her ammunition, face serious. "But he's right. They can wait. We can't. Eventually we run out of food or bullets or luck." Jacob was about to agree when he heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the west, from the direction of Red Sullivan's claim. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought it was reinforcements for Drummond. Then he recognized the spotted mule. Red came into the clearing at a gallop that probably violated every law of nature for a mule that old. He saw the men in the trees, saw the shattered shutter on the cabin, and somehow managed to coax even more speed out of his mount. Bullets kicked up snow around him, but he was riding like a man possessed, and before Drummond's men could coordinate their fire, he was through. Jacob threw open the door just long enough for Red to tumble inside, then slammed and barred it again. The old prospector lay on the floor, gasping for breath, his beard frosted with ice. "You stupid old fool," Jacob said, but there was no heat in it. "They could have killed you." "Probably should have," Red wheezed. "But I got news you need to hear. Army patrol's coming. Captain Hayes himself with 20 troopers. He's at my place right now watering horses." Jacob's heart leaped. "Hayes? What's he doing this far west?" "Said he got word about irregular activity at San Carlos. Said he's been suspicious of Blackwood for months. When he heard about an Apache woman on the run with evidence, he decided to investigate personal." Red sat up, grinning through his beard. "I told him you had her. Told him you were holed up here with half of Blackwood's men trying to dig you out. He's coming, Bear, with the law on his side." Kaine moved closer. "This Hayes, you trust him?" "Far as I trust any Army officer," Jacob said, "but he's got a reputation for playing straight, doesn't take bribes, doesn't look the other way. If anyone in the territory will listen to your evidence, it's him." "How long until he gets here?" Kaine asked Red. "Hour. Maybe less if he heard the shooting." An hour. They just had to hold for an hour. Jacob looked at his ammunition, looked at the barricaded door, looked at Kaine, who was checking her rifle with the calm of someone who'd already made peace with whatever came next. Outside, Drummond's voice came again. "I heard that mule, Thornton. Whoever just rode in, send them out. This don't concern them." Jacob didn't answer. He was done talking. He positioned himself at the window, rifle ready, and waited. Kaine took the opposite side. Red, still catching his breath, started loading spare weapons. "All right then." Drummond's shout carried a new edge. Anger, maybe, or fear that his easy job was turning complicated. "We're coming in. You made your choice." The second attack was different, more organized, more desperate. Drummond knew time was against him now. If Hayes arrived with the army, there'd be questions, investigations, things that couldn't be explained away with Blackwood's money. So the men came in a rush, 3 from the front, 2 trying to circle around to the cabin's blind side. Jacob took the ones in front, methodical shots that forced them to ground. Kaine, with instincts honed by a lifetime of survival, somehow sensed the flanking movement before Jacob did. She spun, fired through a gap in the logs that Jacob hadn't even known existed, and a man screamed. "How did you know?" Jacob asked, amazed. "Ground birds," she said, already reloading. "They went quiet on that side. Something scared them." The fight became a blur. Smoke filled the cabin. Spent shells littered the floor. Jacob's shoulder ached from the sharp's recoil. His ears rang. But every time Drummond's men tried to advance, they met a wall of fire that drove them back. Then the sound changed. Not gunfire, but a bugle call, clear and bright, cutting through the chaos like a blade. The cavalry charge, that distinctive call that meant the army was coming and coming fast. Through the smoke and confusion, Jacob saw Drummond's men break, saw them scatter into the trees like quail flushed from cover, saw Drummond himself, that patient professional tracker, looking back at the cabin with something like respect before melting into the pines. Captain William Hayes arrived in a thunder of hooves and blue uniforms. He was a solid man in his late 40s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many broken promises to trust easy words. His troopers fanned out, securing the area, checking for stragglers. Hayes dismounted and walked to the cabin. Jacob opened the door, rifle still in hand, powder smoke still hanging around him like fog. "Jacob Thornton," Hayes said. It wasn't a question. "Captain, I heard you quit the Army on principle. Heard you've been living alone up here for years. Heard you just fought off 6 armed men to protect an Apache fugitive." Hayes's eyes moved past Jacob to where Kainai stood in the shadows. Must be some hell of a fugitive to risk all that. She's no fugitive, Jacob said. She's a witness to crimes that go all the way up to Colonel Blackwood. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Kainai stepped forward into the light. Even exhausted, even in oversized boots and clothes stained with gun smoke and blood, she carried herself like royalty. I have proof, Captain. Names, dates, amounts, everything your court would need to hang a corrupt officer. Hayes studied her for a long moment. You're Chiricahua. I am. Your people are at war with mine. My people are at war with being starved, stolen from, and sold like cattle. If that makes us enemies of yours, then yes, we are at war. A smile tugged at Hayes' weathered face. It wasn't a happy smile, but it held something like admiration. I like honest enemies better than lying friends. Show me this proof. Kainai produced the notebook. Hayes took it, read one page, then another. His face, already hard, turned to stone. Jesus, he whispered. Jesus Christ. He's been at this for years. At least 5, Kainai said. Maybe more. I only have records from my time in his office. Hayes closed the notebook with hands that wanted to shake. Ma'am, if even half of this is true, Blackwood will hang. I'll see to it personally. And if it's not believed, if an Apache woman's word isn't enough, then we'll make it enough. Hayes turned to one of his sergeants. Jennings, I want a full report. Document everything here. Shell casings, bullet holes, blood in the snow. I want evidence that 6 armed men attacked this cabin. I want it on record that Miss... He paused. Kainai. It means Morning Star. That Miss Morning Star was defending herself against illegal assault. He looked back at her. I can't promise you justice. Systems rigged against your people in ways that shame me. But I can promise you this. I'll fight for it. With everything I have. For the first time since Jacob had found her in the snow, Kainai's shoulders dropped. Just an inch, just enough to show that she'd been carrying weight no one should have to carry alone. That's all I ask. The rest of the day passed in a strange calm. Hayes's men made camp around the cabin. Fires were built. Coffee was made. The tension that had gripped the mountain like a fist slowly unclenched. Jacob found himself sitting by his own fire with Red, watching Kainai talk to Hayes, explaining details from the notebook, her hands moving as she described the systematic theft and cruelty. She's something, Red said quietly. Takes spine to stand up to Blackwood. Takes more to do it knowing you might die for it. Yeah, Jacob agreed. He was exhausted, bone deep, the kind of tired that came after fighting for your life. But underneath it, something else stirred, something that had been dead for 5 years. Purpose, connection, the feeling that maybe isolation wasn't the only answer to grief. Kainai caught him watching and walked over. She'd cleaned up, borrowed a proper coat from one of the troopers. The oversized boots were gone, replaced with moccasins that fit. She looked more like herself now, strong, capable, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness and everything to do with steel. Captain Hayes says we leave for Fort Apache at dawn, she said, with full escort. He wants me to testify to the post commander, get everything on official record before Blackwood can run. Good, that's good. She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. You saved my life, Bear. Twice now. Once in the canyon, once here. I don't have words to repay that debt. No debt, Jacob said. Just doing what needed doing. Still. She was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. When this is over, when Blackwood is arrested and the girls are found and justice is served, what will you do? Come back here? Go back to being alone? Jacob looked at his cabin, at the life he'd built from loneliness and grief, at 5 years of silence that had kept him safe but also kept him hollow. Then he looked at Kainai, at this woman who'd reminded him that some things were worth the risk of caring again. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Been alone so long I'm not sure I remember how to be any other way." "Maybe," Kainai said softly. "You don't have to remember. Maybe you just have to learn new." Their eyes met across the firelight, and in that moment something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first small seed of something that could grow if given time and care and courage. Tomorrow they'd ride to Fort Apache. Tomorrow the fight for justice would begin in earnest. But tonight, in the warm glow of the fire, two people who'd been running from different kinds of pain found something they both needed. They found hope, and sometimes hope is enough to start building a future from the ashes of the past. The snow fell softly now, peaceful instead of threatening. The mountains settled into its evening quiet, and Jacob Thornton, who'd spent 5 years convinced he was done with the world, realized that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't quite done with him yet. Dawn broke over the Mogollon Rim with the kind of cold that turned breath to crystal and made steel brittle. Jacob stood outside his cabin, watching Captain Hayes's men prepare for the journey to Fort Apache. 20 troopers moving with military precision, checking saddles, securing weapons, their blue uniforms stark against the white landscape. It should have felt safe, all this protection. Instead, something gnawed at Jacob's gut, the same instinct that told him when a storm was coming or when a cougar was watching from the rocks. Kainai emerged from the cabin, wrapped in a wool coat that one of Hayes's men had provided. She'd slept inside while Jacob took watch outside, old habits dying hard. Her eyes found his immediately, reading his tension the way she read tracks in snow. "You feel it too," she said. Not a question. "Yeah, too quiet. Drummond's not the type to just walk away." "Neither is Blackwood." She moved to stand beside him, her breath pluming in the frozen air. "When a snake is cornered, it doesn't retreat. It strikes." Captain Hayes joined them, his weathered face serious in the morning light. "We leave in 10 minutes. I'm putting you in the center of the column, Miss Morningstar. Thornton, you ride with her. My best shots on the flanks." He paused, studying the tree line with the wariness of a man who'd survived too many ambushes to trust peaceful mornings. "We'll take the high trail, longer but better sight lines, harder to surprise us." "The high trail goes through Eagle's Pass," Jacob said. "Narrow canyon, walls on both sides. If Drummond knows the country at all, he'll know that's our route." "You have a better suggestion?" Jacob thought about it. Every trail down from the rim had its risks. The high trail through Eagle's Pass offered visibility but limited escape routes. The low trail through the pine forest offered cover but made them vulnerable to ambush at a dozen points. The middle trail crossed 3 creeks, now frozen and treacherous with hidden ice. "No," he admitted. "High trail's our best bet. Just keep your eyes on the canyon walls." They mounted up as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Kainai rode beside Jacob on a bay mare that Hayes had provided, sitting the saddle with the easy grace of someone raised on horseback. She'd braided her hair in the Apache way, a single thick braid that hung down her back. Warrior's hair, practical and proud. The column moved out in a jingle of harness and creak of leather. Jacob rode with his sharps across his saddle, eyes scanning the landscape with the automatic vigilance of a man who'd survived by staying alert. Beside him, Kainai did the same, her attention fixed on details most people would miss. The way the snow had drifted, the angle of broken branches, the subtle signs that spoke of passage and presence. For the first hour, nothing happened. They climbed the narrow trail that switchbacked up the ridge, horses breathing hard in the thin air. The ponderosas gave way to Douglas fir, then to bare rock and windswept plateaus where only juniper and pinyon pine could survive. The view was spectacular, miles of snow-covered mountains stretching to horizons still purple with distance. "Beautiful," Kainai said softly. "My grandmother used to say the mountains are where earth touches sky, where the spirits walk closest to the living." Jacob glanced at her. "You believe that?" I believe the mountains demand respect, and that those who respect them can find peace here." She was quiet for a moment. "My husband and I, we plan to leave the reservation, come to mountains like these, build a life away from soldiers and agents and rules made by men who never saw us as human." Her voice carried no bitterness, just a simple statement of what had been stolen. "He never got the chance. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He died protecting others. That's how he wanted to go, if he had to go." She looked at Jacob, really looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "You carry guilt, Bear. I see it in how you move, like you're carrying weight you can't put down. Your wife and son, they would not want you to carry that." Jacob's throat tightened. No one had talked to him about Martha and the boy in 5 years. No one had dared. "How do you know what they'd want?" "Because I know what Nashota would want for me. He would want me to live, to find joy again, to honor his memory by not dying with him." Her hand found his on the saddle, a brief touch that carried comfort and understanding. "The dead want the living to live, Bear. That's the only way we keep them with us." Before Jacob could respond, a trooper at the front of the column raised his fist, the signal for halt. Everyone stopped, hands going to weapons, eyes scanning for threats. Captain Hayes rode forward to investigate, then turned back, his face grim. "Trail's blocked," he called. "Rock slide. Fresh, maybe last night." Jacob and Kainai rode forward to look. A section of the cliff face had come down, dumping tons of rock and snow across the narrow trail. It looked natural, but Jacob had lived in these mountains long enough to know the difference between nature's work and man's. "This was cut loose," he said, dismounting to examine the debris. "See here? Rope marks on this boulder. Someone levered it free, started the whole slide." Hayes cursed under his breath. "Drummond? Or someone working for him. Means he knew our route, knew where to slow us down." Jacob looked up at the canyon walls rising on either side, saw 100 places where men with rifles could hide. "We're exposed here, Captain. Need to move. Now." But before Hayes could give the order, the first shot rang out. It came from the east wall, high up, the sound echoing off stone so it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The bullet missed, but its purpose wasn't to hit. It was to announce the trap, to let them know they were caught. "Ambush!" Hayes roared. "Dismount! Find cover!" 20 troopers hit the ground in trained chaos, dragging horses behind boulders, forming defensive positions with practiced speed. Jacob pulled Kaine down beside him behind a fallen log, covering her body with his own as more shots kicked up snow around them. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady despite the bullets whining overhead. Jacob counted muzzle flashes. 6 on the east wall, maybe 4 on the west. They got the high ground and were pinned in a kill box. He looked at the blocked trail ahead, the sheer cliffs on both sides, the long exposed stretch behind them. "This is bad. Can we go back?" "Not fast enough. They'd cut us down in the open." He raised his head just enough to see, immediately ducked as a bullet spanged off the rock beside him. "We're stuck until dark, or until they run out of ammunition." Captain Hayes crawled over, his coat torn by a near miss. "Casualties?" "2 wounded, neither serious," a sergeant called back. "But we can't stay here. If they got dynamite, they could bring half that cliff down on us." Hayes looked at Jacob. "You know this country. Any way out I'm not seeing?" Jacob closed his eyes, picturing the terrain from memory. The canyon ran another 200 yards before opening onto a plateau, but those 200 yards were completely exposed, a shooting gallery with nowhere to hide. Unless... "The creek," he said. "There's a creek bed runs along the base of the west wall. It's mostly frozen over, buried under snow, but it's there, deep enough to crawl in. It'll give us cover most of the way to the plateau." "Most of the way isn't all the way." "No, last 50 yards will be exposed. But it's better than sitting here waiting for them to get bold enough to rush us." Hayes considered, bullets still cracking overhead. "We'd have to go one at a time. Leave men here to keep them pinned while others use the creek bed. If they figure out what we're doing—" "They will," Kainai said quietly. Both men looked at her. "I can make sure they don't notice. Or at least, not right away." "How?" Jacob asked. She pointed to the west wall, where the ambushers had positioned themselves among the rocks and scrub. "That's where I go. Circle around behind them, make noise, draw their attention. While they're looking for me, your men use the creek." "Absolutely not," Jacob said. "It's suicide." "It's necessary." Her eyes were calm, resolved. "I'm Apache. I can move through country like this without being seen. Your soldiers can't. And I'm smaller, harder to hit if they do spot me." She gripped his arm, her fingers strong despite their delicacy. "Trust me, Bear. This is what my people do. This is how we've survived for generations." "She's right," Hayes said, though he looked unhappy about it. "We need a distraction. But Miss Morningstar, if you do this, you need to understand the risk." "I understand." She looked at Jacob and something passed between them. A whole conversation in a glance. Fear, trust, a promise that neither of them could name, but both of them felt. "When you hear gunfire on the west wall, that's your signal. Get your men moving. I'll keep them busy as long as I can." Before Jacob could argue further, she was gone. Moving low and fast, disappearing into the snow and rock like a ghost returning to the spirit world. One moment she was there, the next she was simply part of the landscape, invisible. "That's the damnedest thing I ever saw," Hayes muttered. Jacob didn't answer. He was too busy watching the west wall, his heart hammering against his ribs, every instinct screaming at him to go after her. But he forced himself to wait, to trust, to remember that she'd survived things that would have killed most people, and she'd done it through skill and cunning and an iron will to live. 5 minutes passed. 10. The firing from the ambushers slowed, became sporadic. They were conserving ammunition, waiting for the trapped soldiers to panic or try to run. Jacob counted heartbeats, each one an eternity. Then the west wall erupted, not with gunfire, but with shouts, confusion, men yelling to each other in alarm, and then shots, wild and panicked, firing at shadows and movement. Kainai had done exactly what she promised. She'd become a ghost, and ghosts were hard to kill. "Now!" Hayes barked. "Sergeant Jennings, get your squad moving. Use the creek bed. Go!" Half the troopers broke from cover and scrambled toward the depression where the frozen creek ran along the cliff base. They moved fast, bent low, while the remaining men laid down covering fire. The ambushers on the east wall, seeing movement, concentrated their fire there, exactly as planned. They didn't notice the men crawling through the creek bed, didn't see the slow, steady progress toward the plateau. Jacob stayed behind with Hayes and 5 troopers, maintaining fire to keep the east wall pinned. But his attention kept drifting to the west wall where gunshots still echoed and men still shouted, where Kainai was doing the impossible, one woman holding off 4 men through sheer audacity and skill. "Second squad," Hayes ordered. "Your turn. Move." The next group went, then the next. Jacob watched them disappear into the creek bed one by one, counting heads, making sure everyone made it. Until finally, it was just him, Hayes, and 2 troopers. "Your turn, Thornton," Hayes said. "We'll cover." "Not without her," Jacob said. "Damn it, man. She bought us this chance. Don't waste it." "Then I'll waste it." Jacob's voice was iron. "I'm not leaving her behind." The firing on the west wall had stopped. Complete silence from that direction, which was somehow worse than gunfire. Hayes looked at Jacob, saw the set of his jaw, and nodded slowly. "Then I guess we're waiting. But if those ambushers realize we're still here—" They didn't have to wait long. A figure appeared at the edge of the creek bed, climbing up from the rocks. For one terrible moment Jacob thought it was one of Drummond's men. Then he recognized the braid, the fluid movement, the dark eyes finding his across 30 yards of snow. Kainai was carrying a rifle that wasn't hers, and had blood on her coat that probably wasn't hers either. She ran toward them in a low crouch, bullets starting to kick up around her as the east wall ambushers finally noticed their western flank had gone quiet. Jacob broke from cover and ran to meet her halfway, grabbed her arm and pulled her behind the fallen log where he'd been sheltering. She was breathing hard, her face flushed with exertion, and she was grinning like a wolf that had just run down prey. 4 men, she gasped. I led them away from their positions, made them chase. They're not very good at chasing. You're bleeding, Jacob said, seeing the cut on her cheek. Rock splinter from a ricochet. Nothing. She looked past him at Hayes. Your men clear? Clear. Now let's get you both out of here before those boys on the east wall get smart. Hayes and his remaining men laid down a storm of covering fire while Jacob and Kainai made their run for the creek bed. They slid into it as bullets whined overhead. The creek bed was deeper than Jacob remembered, carved out by centuries of snowmelt, its ice-covered bottom slick and treacherous. But it offered cover, and right now cover was everything. They crawled through it side by side, the world narrowing to ice and stone and the sound of their own breathing. Above them, frustrated shouts echoed as the ambushers realized their prey was escaping. More shots, but wild now, firing blind at an enemy they couldn't see. The last 50 yards were exactly as bad as Jacob had feared. The creek bed shallowed out, offering less and less cover until finally it disappeared entirely. They'd have to break into the open, sprint across exposed ground to where Hayes' men waited on the plateau. On 3, Jacob said. Stay low and run like hell. Kainai nodded, gathering herself. Their eyes met one more time, and Jacob saw in hers the same thing he felt. They'd made it this far together. They'd make it the rest of the way, or die trying. 1, he counted. 2, 3. They burst from the creek bed and ran. Snow exploded around them as the ambushers found their range. Jacob felt the heat of a near miss pass his ear, saw Kainai stumble as her boot hit ice, caught her before she fell, kept them both moving. 30 yards, 20, 10. Hands grabbed them, pulled them behind the safety of boulders where Hayes's troopers had set up a defensive perimeter. They collapsed on the frozen ground, gasping for air, alive against odds that shouldn't have been beaten. Hayes appeared above them, his face showing relief he tried to hide behind military bearing. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen in 30 years of service. Maybe both. Kainai looked up at him, still catching her breath. We're alive. That's all that matters. True enough. Hayes looked back at the canyon where the ambushers were still firing sporadically, not understanding yet that their trap had failed. We need to move before they regroup. Fort Apache is 10 miles east. If we push hard, we can make it by nightfall. They mounted up on tired horses and rode. The ambushers tried one more time to stop them, 6 men coming out of the rocks in a desperate charge. But Hayes's troopers, no longer pinned down, no longer helpless, met them with disciplined volleys that sent them scattering back into cover. And then they were clear. The plateau opened before them, wide and white and offering no place for ambushers to hide. The danger wasn't over, but it was behind them, at least for now. Jacob found himself riding beside Kainai again, the two of them positioned in the center of the column. She was examining the rifle she'd taken, checking its action with the air of someone appreciating a well-made tool. "Where'd you get that?" Jacob asked. "One of Drummond's men. He won't be needing it anymore." "Did you?" "He's alive. Probably has a headache that'll last a week, but alive." She met his eyes. "I take no joy in killing, Bear. Only in surviving. There's a difference." "Yeah, there is." He was quiet for a moment, watching the snow-covered landscape roll past. "What you did back there, that was beyond brave. That was necessary," she finished. "And what you did, coming for me instead of running when you had the chance, that was foolish. Foolish and brave and exactly what Nashota would have done." Her voice softened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still got to get to Fort Apache. Still got to convince the post commander to believe an Apache woman's word over an Army colonel's. Then we'll convince him together. She shifted in her saddle, moving closer so their knees almost touched. I'm beginning to think together is better than alone, Bear. For both of us. Jacob looked at her. This warrior woman who'd survived hell and come out fighting, who'd saved his life as often as he'd saved hers, who'd reminded him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And he realized that Kainai was right. Together was better. Not easier, maybe, definitely not safer, but better in ways that mattered more than ease or safety. Yeah, he said, I'm beginning to think the same. They rode toward the setting sun, toward Fort Apache and justice, and a reckoning that had been 5 years coming. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and uncaring, witness to everything and judging nothing. And ahead, somewhere in the gathering twilight, the future waited. Uncertain, dangerous, but filled with possibility. And for two people who'd lost everything, possibility was enough. They reached Father Miguel's mission just as the last light was bleeding from the western sky. The mission sat in a small valley between ridges, a humble collection of adobe buildings clustered around a wooden chapel with a cross that caught the dying sun like a promise. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the smell of cooking fires and pine wood. After the violence of the canyon and the tension of the long ride, the scene looked almost impossibly peaceful. But Jacob noticed the details that told a different story. The way people moved between buildings with quick glances over their shoulders, the children who played quietly instead of with wild abandon. The men stationed at the corners of the compound, trying to look casual but watching the approaches with military vigilance. This was a place that knew danger, a place that had learned to hide in plain sight. Captain Hayes raised his hand, signaling the column to halt 50 yards out. Standard procedure when approaching any settlement, giving both sides time to recognize each other to establish peaceful intent. A figure emerged from the chapel, moving with the careful dignity of age and authority. Even from a distance, Jacob could see the simple brown robe, the silver cross catching firelight, the weathered face of a man who'd spent decades in the territory sun. Father Miguel Santos stopped at the edge of the compound, hands spread to show they were empty, his voice carrying across the space between. Captain Hayes, I heard you were riding this way. Welcome to Mission Santa Teresa. You and your men are welcome to food and rest. Hayes dismounted and walked forward alone, as courtesy demanded. Jacob watched the exchange, saw the captain's posture shift from military formality to something more human. These two knew each other, trusted each other maybe, or at least respected what the other was trying to do in a territory where respect was rare currency. Father Miguel, Hayes said, and even his hard voice softened. I appreciate the hospitality. We've had a rough day. So I see. Miguel's eyes moved past Hayes to the column, counting wounded, reading exhaustion in the slump of shoulders and the way horses hung their heads. Then his gaze found Kainai, and something changed in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or hope. The Apache woman, she is the one with the evidence? She is. Her name is Kainai, Morning Star. Miguel crossed himself, lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been simple gratitude. Bring her. Bring all of them. We have food enough and shelter. He paused, then added quietly, and we have someone who will want to see her very much. They rode into the compound as full dark settled over the valley. People emerged from the buildings, Apache people, their faces showing the careful neutrality of those who'd learned to trust no one in uniform. Women, children, old men. No young warriors, Jacob noticed. Those were either dead, imprisoned, or still hiding in the high country with the last free bands. But when Kainai dismounted, something changed. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd, growing from whisper to exclamation. An older woman pushed through the others, moving with the determined strength of someone who'd carried grief too long and suddenly saw hope. Her face was weathered as canyon stone, her hair more silver than black, but her eyes were sharp and alive with emotion. "Daughter," the woman said, and the word held a world of feeling. "Daughter, we thought you dead." Kainai's composure, that warrior's control that had held through ambush and violence and desperate flight, finally cracked. "Sarah," she breathed. And then she was moving, closing the distance, embracing the older woman with a fierceness that spoke of bonds deeper than blood. Jacob watched, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. This was Sarah Running Deer, he realized. The woman Kainai had mentioned. The one whose daughter Mary had disappeared into Blackwood's trafficking network. The one who'd been counting the vanished, keeping the memory of stolen girls alive when the world wanted to forget. The two women held each other in the firelight, speaking rapidly in Apache, words flowing too fast for Jacob to catch more than fragments. But he didn't need to understand the language to understand the emotion. Loss and reunion, fear and hope. The desperate question that Sarah must be asking. "Do you have news of my daughter? Do you know where they took my Mary?" Father Miguel touched Jacob's arm, gently pulling his attention away from the private moment. "Come. Your men need food and rest. We have little, but what we have, we share." He led Jacob and Captain Hayes toward the main building, a long adobe structure with small windows and a heavy door. "You should know, Captain, that this mission exists in a gray area of the law. I shelter Apache families who refuse to go to San Carlos. Technically, I am harboring fugitives." "Technically," Hayes said, his voice dry as desert sand, "I'm too busy chasing actual criminals to worry about families trying to survive. Your secret's safe with me, Father." Inside, the building was warm and smelled of beans and cornbread and coffee. 20 or 30 people lived here, Jacob estimated, crowded into a space meant for half that. They'd made it work through sheer determination and the kind of communal living that came natural to people who understood that survival meant taking care of each other. They ate in relative silence, exhaustion making conversation difficult. But as plates emptied and coffee warmed cold hands, Father Miguel leaned forward, his eyes moving between Hayes and Jacob. "The evidence Kainai carries," he said quietly. "I have heard rumors of it. Blackwood's crimes documented, names and dates and proof that cannot be denied." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Is it enough? Enough to bring down a man with his power and connections?" Hayes set down his coffee cup, the tin clanging softly against the wooden table. "Alone? Maybe not. The system protects its own, even the rotten ones. But I've been gathering my own evidence. Discrepancies in supply manifests. Reports of goods that never arrived. Testimony from soldiers who saw things that didn't sit right." He looked at Miguel steadily. "Combined with what Morning Star has, we might have enough. Might. And if you don't? Then Blackwood walks, and everyone who testified against him becomes a target." Hayes didn't flinch from the truth. "It's a risk. A hell of a risk." "Risk we have to take," Jacob said, surprising himself by speaking. Both men looked at him. "Because doing nothing means more girls disappear, more families starve while Blackwood sells their supplies, more years of the same corruption, the same cruelty, the same system grinding people down and calling it policy." He met their eyes, one after the other. "I quit the Army 5 years ago because I was tired of being part of that. I'm not going to stand aside and let it continue now." Miguel smiled, a gentle expression that held unexpected steel. "Spoken like a man who has rediscovered his purpose. That is good. Purpose is what separates the living from those who merely survive." He stood, moving to the window, looking out at the compound where Apache families gathered around fires, their faces illuminated by flames that pushed back the darkness. "These people have lived with injustice so long they almost expect it. But Kainai, she gives them something different. She gives them hope that the system can work, that evidence can matter, that truth can win." He turned back. "We cannot let that hope die." The door opened and Kainai entered with Sarah running deer. Both women's faces were marked by tears, but there was strength there too. The kind of strength that came from shared grief acknowledged and burdens carried together. Kainai moved to the table, pulled out the leather notebook, and opened it to the section listing the disappeared girls. Sarah has been keeping her own records, Kainai said. Names of every girl taken from San Carlos in the last 5 years, dates they left, promises made by Blackwood about schools and opportunities. Her finger traced down the page. Mary Running Deer, 14 years old, taken November 12, 1877. Promised enrollment in Phoenix School for Girls. The school has no record of her arrival. Sarah spoke, her English heavily accented but clear. 23 girls in 5 years from our reservation alone. I write their names. I speak their names in prayer. I will not let them be forgotten. Her hands, gnarled with age and work, gripped the table edge. But names are not enough. We need to bring them home. We will, Hayes said, and it wasn't empty comfort. It was a promise made by a man who understood the weight of promises. When we reach Fort Apache, I'll send telegrams. To every army post in the territory, every marshal's office, every city where these girls might have been taken. We'll find them. And Blackwood? Sarah asked. What happens to the man who stole our daughters? He hangs, Hayes said simply. If the law works the way it's supposed to, he hangs. They talked long into the night, Hayes and Miguel planning the approach to Fort Apache, discussing which officers could be trusted and which were likely in Blackwood's pocket. Jacob found himself sitting beside Kainai as the conversation flowed around them, their shoulders touching in the crowded room, a point of contact that felt both natural and significant. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words meant only for him. For everything. For saving me in the canyon. For fighting beside me. For not walking away when any sensible man would have. "I'm not sensible," Jacob said. "Been accused of a lot of things, but sensible ain't one of them." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "Good. Sensible men don't change the world. Stubborn fools do." "Is that what we're doing? Changing the world?" "Our corner of it, maybe. One corrupt kernel at a time." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "After this is done, after Blackwood is arrested and the girls are found and justice is served, what will you do, Bear? Go back to your mountain? Back to being alone?" Jacob thought about his cabin, about 5 years of solitude and snow, thought about the life he'd built from grief and isolation. Then he thought about the last 3 days, the fear and violence and impossible odds. Thought about riding beside this woman who faced death with courage and spoke truth with fire. Thought about feeling alive again, feeling purpose again, feeling like maybe there was more to existence than just surviving until tomorrow. "I don't know," he admitted. "Spent so long convinced I was done with people, done with the world. But lately I'm thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe the world still has use for an old mountain man. Maybe—" He trailed off, not quite brave enough to finish the thought. Kainai finished it for him. "Maybe you don't have to go back to being alone. Maybe there's another way." Her hand found his under the table, a small gesture that held enormous meaning. "I'm not asking for promises, Bear. War is coming. We might not survive it. But if we do, if we make it through, I would like to know you better. Would like to see if two people carved hollow by loss can build something new together." Jacob's throat tightened with emotion he hadn't felt in 5 years. "I'd like that too." They sat in the warm room surrounded by people planning revolution, their hands joined beneath the table, two survivors contemplating a future that might never come but was worth fighting for anyway. Outside, the mountain night pressed close, cold and indifferent. But inside, in the glow of firelight and shared purpose, hope took root. Fragile, uncertain, but growing. Captain Hayes stood, drawing everyone's attention. "We leave at dawn. Fort Apache is 2 days' ride, maybe less if we push. Once we're there, we move fast. File formal charges, get the evidence on record, request immediate investigation. He looked at each person in turn, making sure they understood. Blackwood will know we're coming. He'll have time to prepare a defense, call in favors, maybe run, but we can't help that. We play this by the book, or we're no better than him. By the book, Father Miguel agreed, but with one addition. He walked to a shelf and pulled down a wooden box, opened it to reveal a stack of letters, all carefully preserved. Testimony from 3 Army officers, 2 government doctors, and a territorial judge, all documenting their suspicions about Blackwood, all sealed and dated, waiting for the day when someone had the courage to stand up. He handed the box to Hayes. That day has come. Hayes took the box like it was made of gold. Father, this could get you killed if Blackwood finds out. I am an old man who has made peace with his God. I fear only failing in my duty to the innocent. Miguel's eyes found Kainai. She has given us the weapon. Now we must have the courage to use it. They dispersed to sleep, troopers bedding down in the chapel, the Apache families returning to their quarters. Jacob found a corner of the main building, rolled himself in a borrowed blanket. But sleep was elusive, his mind too active, replaying the day's violence and planning for tomorrow's challenges. A soft sound made him open his eyes. Kainai, moving through the dark room with that ghost-like Apache stealth, settling down near him. Not touching, but close enough that he could hear her breathing, could feel her presence like warmth against the cold. "Can't sleep either?" he whispered. "Too much thinking, too much worry." A pause, then, "I'm scared, Bear. Not of dying. I've made peace with that. But of failing. Of Sarah and all the other mothers never knowing what happened to their daughters. Of Blackwood winning because we weren't strong enough or smart enough or lucky enough." Jacob rolled onto his side to face her, could just make out her profile in the dim light from the dying fire. "Then we better be strong enough, smart enough, and lucky enough. Because those girls deserve better than to be forgotten, and you deserve better than to die wondering if you did enough." He reached out, found her hand in the darkness, held it with gentle firmness. "We'll make it, Morning Star. I don't know how, but we'll make it. Together." Her fingers tightened on his, a grip that spoke of determination and trust, and something more tender that neither of them was quite ready to name. "Together," she agreed. "That's a good word, a strong word." They lay in the darkness, hands joined, 2 people on the edge of everything, and somehow the fear was easier to bear knowing they weren't facing it alone. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggle. But inside Mission Santa Teresa, in a room full of sleeping hope and waking courage, 2 hearts beat in rhythm. And when dawn came with its promise of danger and possibility, they would rise to meet it. Not as a mountain hermit and an Apache fugitive, but as partners, as warriors, as 2 people who'd found in each other something worth fighting for. The future was uncertain, justice was not guaranteed, but they had truth on their side and courage and each other. Sometimes that was enough, sometimes that was everything. Fort Apache rose from the valley floor like a promise carved in stone and timber. Its walls, weathered by territory sun and wind, stood 12 feet high, surrounding a parade ground where the flag snapped in the morning breeze. Guard towers marked each corner, sentries visible as dark silhouettes against the pale sky. It was the largest military installation in eastern Arizona, home to 300 soldiers and the symbol of United States authority in a land that still remembered when it belonged to someone else. Jacob reined in his horse at the top of the rise, looking down at the fort with mixed feelings. He'd ridden through those gates many times as an Army scout, back when he still believed the uniform meant honor and the flag meant justice. Back before he'd seen too many broken promises and too much blood spilled in the name of civilization. Now, 5 years removed from that life, the sight of Fort Apache stirred old memories, most of them bitter. Beside him, Kainai sat her horse with the rigid posture of someone entering enemy territory. Her eyes moved across the fort's defenses, reading them the way she read everything, looking for exits and weaknesses and the invisible boundaries between safety and danger. "A lot of soldiers," she said quietly. "3 companies," Captain Hayes confirmed, riding up to join them. "Most are good men following orders. Some are not. The question is whether the post commander, Colonel Hendricks, is one of the good ones." He looked at Kaine with an expression somewhere between respect and worry. "When we ride in there, you become a prisoner in everything but name. Army protocol. An Apache woman accusing a ranking officer of crimes, they'll have to hold you while they investigate. For your own protection, they'll say." "Protection." Kainai spoke the word like it tasted of ashes. "Like the protection at San Carlos? Like the protection that took Nashota and 17 others? "No," Hayes said firmly. "Not like that. I give you my word. But you need to understand what you're walking into. There will be questions, suspicion, officers who served with Blackwood, who count him as friend. They'll tear apart every word you say, looking for lies." "Let them look." Kainai's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Truth doesn't change because someone doesn't want to believe it." They rode down the slope toward the fort gates, the column of blue-coated troopers and 2 civilians who didn't quite fit the picture. Jacob felt eyes on them before they were halfway down, saw the sentries in the towers tracking their approach, saw figures gathering along the walls to watch. News traveled fast in the territory. Word of an Apache woman with evidence against Colonel Blackwood had probably reached Fort Apache days ago, carried on telegraph wires and whispered conversations. The gates opened as they approached. A young lieutenant stood waiting, his face showing the kind of nervous energy that came from being given orders he didn't fully understand. "Captain Hayes, sir. Colonel Hendricks is expecting you. He requests you bring the Apache woman directly to his office." "Just the woman?" Hayes's voice carried warning. "And 1 escort, sir. The rest of your men are to report to the quartermaster for billeting." Hayes looked at Jacob, a question in his eyes. Jacob nodded. They'd discussed this possibility at the mission. The Army would want to control the narrative, control who heard what and when. Standard procedure when dealing with accusations that could topple powerful men. They dismounted in the parade ground, soldiers stopping their morning duties to stare. Jacob helped Kaine down, his hand lingering on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. She met his eyes, and in that glance passed an entire conversation. Trust, fear, determination, a promise that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Colonel Hendricks' office occupied the corner of the headquarters building, a space that spoke of a man who valued order and efficiency. Maps covered the walls, supply manifests were stacked in neat piles, and everything from the inkwell to the flag stand had its designated place. Hendricks himself was a compact man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He studied Kaine with the attention of someone examining a complex tactical problem. "Miss Morning Star," he said, not quite making it a question. "Captain Hayes has told me quite a story. An Indian agent trafficking in stolen supplies and human beings. Quite an accusation." "It's not an accusation," Kaine said, her voice level. "It's documented fact." She placed the leather notebook on his desk. Names, dates, amounts, 5 years of theft and cruelty, all in Colonel Blackwood's own records. Hendricks opened the notebook, began reading. His face showed nothing, the practiced neutrality of a career officer who'd learned to hide his thoughts. But Jacob, watching closely, saw the tiny tells, the tightening around the eyes, the way his jaw clenched when he read certain entries, the slight tremor in his hand as he turned pages. Finally, Hendricks closed the book. "This is damning, if it's genuine." "It's genuine," Hayes said. "I've cross-referenced some of these entries with my own records. Supply discrepancies I've been tracking for months. They match." "Even so." Hendricks stood, walked to the window overlooking the parade ground. "Silas Blackwood is a respected officer. He's personal friends with the territorial governor. His family has connections in Washington. If we move against him with anything less than absolute proof, if we make accusations that don't hold up, it won't just be our careers that end. It'll set back every honest officer in the territory." "And if we don't move?" Jacob asked, speaking for the first time. "How many more girls disappear? How many more families starve? At what point does protecting careers become more important than protecting the innocent?" Hendricks turned, his eyes hard. "You're out of uniform, Thornton. You don't get to lecture me on duty." "No, sir. I quit that right. Turned in my resignation the day I decided I couldn't stomach another massacre called a military action." Jacob held the colonel's gaze. "But I didn't quit my conscience. And my conscience says that woman standing there has more courage than most men I served with. She's risked everything to bring you the truth. The least you can do is have the backbone to act on it." Silence filled the office, thick enough to choke on. Then, unexpectedly, Hendricks smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it held a grudging respect. "Hayes said you were ornery. Didn't mention you were right." He returned to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a stack of telegrams. "I've been receiving reports about Blackwood for 2 years. Nothing concrete, just whispers and suspicions. Supply trains that arrived half empty. Requisition forms with altered numbers. Apache families claiming their children were taken under false pretenses." He tapped the telegrams. "But whispers don't convict. Suspicions don't hang. I needed proof." "Now you have it," Kainai said. "Now I have it." Hendricks sat heavily, suddenly looking every year of his age. "God help us all, now I have it. Which means I have to act. But acting means going through proper channels, means filing formal charges with the territorial court, means giving Blackwood time to mount a defense." "Time to run, you mean," Jacob said. "Possibly. Probably." Hendricks looked at Kainai. "I'm going to need you to stay here, Miss Morningstar. As a material witness, you'll be kept in protective custody while we prepare the case." "In a cell, you mean?" "In quarters. Guarded, but comfortable. I won't put you in the stockade unless you give me reason." He paused. "You have my word you'll be treated with respect and dignity. The word of the post commander." Kainai looked at Jacob, then at Hayes, reading in their faces what she already knew. This was the price of justice. This was what truth cost when you were Apache in a white man's world. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and became in that moment something more than a fugitive or a witness. She became the embodiment of every stolen girl, every starving family, every promise broken by men who saw her people as obstacles instead of humans. "I accept your word, Colonel. I will stay, but I want daily reports on the investigation. I want to know when charges are filed, when Blackwood is arrested, when the search for the missing girls begins. I've spent too long being silent and invisible. I will not be silent now." "Agreed." Hendricks stood, extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Kainai took it. The handshake was brief, formal, but it represented something larger. A compact between enemies trying to become something better. A knock interrupted the moment. The young lieutenant from earlier entered, his face pale with news that couldn't wait. "Colonel, sorry to interrupt, but we've received word. Colonel Blackwood is here, at the fort. He arrived an hour ago." The room went cold. Jacob's hand dropped to his pistol. Hayes cursed under his breath. Kainai's face showed nothing, but her eyes became hard as obsidian. "Here?" Hendricks' voice was sharp. "Why?" "He says he received word that a dangerous Apache fugitive was being brought to Fort Apache. Says he's here to see that justice is properly served. He's in the officers' mess right now, sir, talking to some of the garrison." Hendricks's jaw tightened. "Of course he is. Getting his version out first. Building sympathy before we can file charges." He looked at Hayes. "He's good. I'll give him that. Beating us to the punch." "We file now," Hayes said. "Today. Right now. Before he can poison the well further." "On what authority?" "I need the territorial prosecutor to agree to charges. That takes time." "Then make time move faster." Jacob's voice was low and dangerous. "Because Blackwood didn't come here to face justice. He came here to kill it. and probably kill anyone who threatens him. His eyes found Kaine. He can't let her testify. She's the only one who can put him at the scene of his crimes. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the door opened again. No knock this time, just the confident entrance of a man who considered himself above such niceties. Colonel Silas Blackwood stepped into the office, and Jacob felt his blood turn to ice. Blackwood was everything Jacob had expected, and worse. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of face that inspired confidence. He wore his uniform like armor, every button polished, every crease perfect. His eyes, pale blue and cold as winter sky, moved across the room, cataloging threats and calculating responses. "Hendricks," he said, his voice cultured and smooth, "thank you for your hospitality. I know my visit is unexpected, but when I heard about the accusations being made, I felt it my duty to come address them personally." His gaze found Kaine, and something flickered there. Hatred, maybe, or fear dressed up as contempt. And this must be the young woman who's been telling such interesting stories. "Miss Morningstar is a material witness in an ongoing investigation," Hendricks said, his voice carefully neutral. "She's under the protection of this command." "Protection from what? From justice?" Blackwood smiled, showing teeth that looked too white, too perfect. "I understand she's accused of murdering 3 soldiers at San Carlos, quite serious charges. Yet here she is, being treated like an honored guest instead of the criminal she is." "The murder charges are fabricated," Hayes said, stepping forward, "as you well know, since you're the one who fabricated them. Captain Hayes, I should have known you'd be involved in this. You've been making trouble for months, haven't you? Questioning my requisition forms, requesting audits, all because you've never understood the realities of managing an Indian agency." Blackwood's voice hardened. "The work I do keeps the peace, keeps Apache families fed and sheltered. If some supplies get diverted, if some corners get cut, it's for the greater good." "The greater good didn't include selling 14-year-old girls to brothels." Kaine's voice cut through the room like a knife. "The greater good didn't include starving families so you could grow rich. The greater good is what you hide behind while you destroy lives." Blackwood's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the ugliness beneath. "You speak English well for a savage. Who taught you? Some soldier who took pity on you? Some missionary who thought he could civilize the uncivilizable?" He turned to Hendricks. "Colonel, I demand this woman be placed under arrest immediately. The territorial warrant for her arrest is legal and binding." "Show me the warrant," Hendricks said. "I have it with me." Blackwood reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document, handed it over. "Signed by Territorial Judge Morrison. 3 counts of murder, conspiracy to incite Apache uprising, theft of government property, all capital offenses." Hendricks read the warrant, his face growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked up, and Jacob saw in his eyes something he hadn't expected. Rage. Pure, controlled, military rage. "This warrant," Hendricks said slowly, "is signed and dated yesterday, 3 days after Miss Morningstar left San Carlos, 3 days after the supposed murders occurred." He held up the paper. "Care to explain how a judge in Tucson signed a warrant for murders that hadn't happened yet when he signed it?" Blackwood's face went blank. For just a second, the polished facade cracked, showing panic underneath. Then he recovered, smooth as oil on water. "Clerical error. The dates must have been transposed." "Convenient." Hendricks set the warrant on his desk like it was contaminated. "Here's what's going to happen, Colonel Blackwood. You're going to remain at Fort Apache while I contact Judge Morrison directly and verify this warrant. You're going to answer questions about supply discrepancies at San Carlos, and you're going to explain why an Apache woman would risk her life to accuse you if those accusations were false. You can't hold me. I'm a ranking officer. I'm the post commander. I can do whatever I deem necessary to maintain order and investigate potential crimes." Hendricks' voice was iron wrapped in velvet. "Consider yourself confined to quarters until further notice." Blackwood's eyes swept the room, and in them Jacob saw calculation. saw a cornered predator weighing options, running, fighting, eliminating threats. The man's hand moved toward his belt, toward the service pistol holstered there. Jacob was faster. His own pistol cleared leather in a smooth draw honed by years of survival, the barrel leveling at Blackwood's chest before the colonel's hand had touched his weapon. "Don't," Jacob said quietly. "Give me a reason. Please." Time froze. Then Blackwood's hand moved away from his pistol, rose in a gesture of surrender. But his eyes, those cold blue eyes, found Kainai one more time. "This isn't over," he said softly. "You think you've won, but you're alone in a fort full of my friends. You're Apache in a white man's court. You're nothing but a savage telling lies, and lies don't change the truth." Kainai stepped forward, close enough that she had to look up to meet his gaze. But there was nothing small about her, nothing weak. She was every stolen daughter, every starving mother, every broken promise given form. "I am Chiricahua Apache," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "My people survived your wars, your broken treaties, your reservations. We survived because we know something you'll never understand. The truth doesn't need to be believed to be true. It just is. And your truth is that you're a thief and a slaver and a coward who hides behind his uniform. No friends, no lies, no power can change that. The evidence will speak, the missing girls will be found, and you will hang." Silence followed her words, heavy and absolute. Then Hendricks spoke, his voice carrying command that 20 years of service had forged. "Sergeant Patterson, escort Colonel Blackwood to the visiting officer's quarters. Post guards. No visitors without my express permission." As Blackwood was led away, Jacob watched him go, reading the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes moved, still calculating, still planning. This wasn't over. Men like Blackwood didn't surrender. They adapted. They found new angles, new ways to strike, and they were most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. "He'll try something," Jacob said to Hendricks. "Tonight, tomorrow, whenever he sees an opening. He's finished and he knows it. That makes him desperate." "I know." Hendricks looked old suddenly, tired. "I'll double the guard on his quarters and on Miss Morningstar's. But you're right to worry. Desperate men do desperate things." He turned to Kainai. "I'm putting you in the commander's guest quarters. Best security on the base. Hayes, Thornton, you'll bunk nearby. If Blackwood makes a move, I want people around who know how to handle trouble." That night, Jacob stood watch outside Kainai's quarters, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the lamplight. The fort was quiet. Soldiers settled in for sleep, only the sentries moving on their appointed rounds. But quiet didn't mean safe. In Jacob's experience, trouble came quietest of all. The door opened softly. Kainai emerged, wrapped in a borrowed shawl against the cold. She sat beside him on the wooden bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much thinking, too much waiting." She looked up at the stars, those same stars that shone over mountains and deserts and reservations. "When I started this, when I first wrote down those numbers in Blackwood's office, I thought justice would be simple. Present evidence, watch the guilty be punished. I didn't understand how complicated truth becomes when powerful men don't want to hear it." "Justice is never simple," Jacob said, "but that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for." "Is it worth dying for?" He thought about that, really thought about it. About Martha and his boy, buried under the ponderosa. About 5 years of hiding from the world because the world had hurt him too much. About 3 days of fear and violence and impossible odds, all for a woman he barely knew and a cause that wasn't technically his. "Yeah," he said finally, "it is. Because if we don't fight for it, who will? And if we let men like Blackwood win, what does that say about who we are?" Kainai leaned against him, her head finding his shoulder, the gesture both trusting and exhausted. "Nashota would have liked you, Bear. He always said the measure of a man wasn't in his strength but in what he did with it, whether he used it to hurt or to protect. I'm trying to protect. Might not be very good at it. You're good enough. She was quiet for a long moment, then said, If we survive this, if Blackwood hangs and the girls come home and everything works out the way it's supposed to, I want to see your cabin. Want to see the place where you've been hiding all these years. It's just a cabin, nothing special. It's where you survived. That makes it special. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. And maybe, if you're willing, it could be where we both start living again instead of just surviving. Jacob's throat tightened with emotions he'd thought dead and buried. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. They sat together in the darkness, two people on the edge of everything, finding in each other something worth more than safety or comfort, finding hope, and in a world that had given them every reason to despair, hope was the most dangerous and necessary thing of all. Somewhere in the fort, Blackwood lay awake, planning. Somewhere in the darkness, danger waited. But here, under stars that had witnessed countless human struggles and would witness countless more, two survivors chose to believe that tomorrow might be better than yesterday, that justice might win, that love might grow from loss. It was enough. For now, it was enough. 3 days had passed since Blackwood's dramatic confrontation in Colonel Hendricks's office. 3 days of depositions, telegrams, and legal machinery grinding forward with agonizing slowness. Blackwood remained confined to quarters under heavy guard, while Kainai stayed in the commander's guest quarters, giving testimony to military investigators who arrived daily from territorial headquarters. Jacob had barely slept. Each night he stood watch outside Kainai's door, rifle across his knees, waiting for Blackwood to make his move. Because desperate men always made a move. This morning felt different. The air carried a weight of inevitability, the sense that events set in motion could no longer be stopped. Jacob stood in the parade ground, watching as Captain Hayes emerged from the telegraph office, a sheet of paper clutched in his hand. The captain's face told the story before his words could. Relief mixed with grim satisfaction, the expression of a man who'd gambled everything and won. Territorial prosecutor just filed formal charges, Hayes said. Hayes said, handing the telegram to Colonel Hendricks. Theft of government property, trafficking in persons, conspiracy to defraud. Judge Morrison in Tucson signed the arrest warrant an hour ago. He paused, and a smile touched his weathered features. The real one this time, dated correctly. Hendricks read the telegram twice, as if not quite believing. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in his uniform pocket, and looked toward the building where Blackwood had been confined. Sergeant Patterson, assemble a detail. Full dress uniform. We're going to do this by the book. His eyes found Jacob. Thornton, fetch Miss Morningstar. Miss Top. She has a right to see this. But before anyone could move, a shout rang out from the guard tower. Fire! Building 3! Fire! Every head turned. Smoke was pouring from one of the storage buildings on the south side of the compound, black and thick, billowing into the morning sky. Soldiers ran toward it, forming bucket brigades, shouting orders. In the chaos and confusion, in those critical seconds when attention shifted from watching to fighting, Jacob felt the hair on his neck stand up. It's a diversion, he said, already running toward Kainai's quarters. Blackwood's running. He burst through the door to find the room empty. The window stood open, cold air pouring in. On the bed lay a simple note in handwriting he recognized from supply manifests. The savage dies today. Come alone to Eagle's Pass if you want to face me. Otherwise I disappear and she dies slow. Jacob's vision tunneled, rage and fear combining into something cold and focused. Eagle's Pass. The narrow canyon 10 miles east where they'd been ambushed days ago. Blackwood had chosen his ground carefully. Remote, defensible, far enough from the fort that help wouldn't arrive in time. Hayes appeared in the doorway, saw the empty room and Jacob's face, and understood immediately. He took her. Son of a bitch used the fire as cover. He wants me to come alone, Jacob said, his voice flat and hard. Wants a confrontation where there's no witnesses, no legal consequences, just him and me and the woman who destroyed him. You can't go alone. It's suicide. It's the only play I got. Jacob checked his weapons with mechanical precision. Sharp's rifle loaded, pistol loaded, knife sharp. He'd survived 5 years alone on a mountain by making smart choices. This wasn't a smart choice, but it was the only choice that mattered. Hendricks entered, face blackened with smoke from fighting the fire. Blackwood's gone. Took a horse from the stables during the confusion. 2 guards are dead. He's armed and desperate, and he has your Apache woman. He looked at Jacob with the recognition of one fighting man to another. He's going to kill her no matter what. You know that. Even if you trade yourself, he can't leave witnesses. I know, Jacob said, but I also know I can't sit here while she dies scared and alone. So I'm going. You can try to stop me or you can help me. Your choice. Hendricks and Hayes exchanged a look, some unspoken conversation passing between them. Then Hendricks nodded. How long to ride to Eagles Pass? 2 hours if I push hard. Then you have a 3-hour head start. After that, I'm bringing every soldier in this fort. If Blackwood kills you, at least he won't escape. Hendricks extended his hand. Good luck, Thornton. Bring her back. Jacob took the hand, felt the strength in that grip, the respect. Then he was moving, running for the stables, saddling his horse with hands that refused to shake despite the fear clawing at his chest. He'd lost Martha and his boy to disease, lost them while feeling helpless and useless. He wouldn't lose Kaine the same way, not without a fight, not without making Blackwood pay in blood for every moment of fear he'd caused her. The ride to Eagles Pass was the longest 2 hours of Jacob's life. He pushed his horse hard, maybe too hard, but speed was everything now. Every minute delayed was another minute Kaine spent in Blackwood's hands, and the thought of what the colonel might do to her burned in Jacob's mind like acid. He reached the mouth of the canyon just as the sun climbed to its zenith. The narrow passage looked exactly as it had 3 days ago, walls of stone rising on both sides, the creek bed running along the western edge. But today there were no ambushers hidden in the rocks. Just one man standing in the center of the canyon, waiting. Colonel Silas Blackwood stood with military bearing, his uniform still immaculate despite his flight. His pistol was holstered, his hands empty and visible. 50 yards behind him, tied to a boulder with rope that bit into her wrists, Kaine sat with blood on her lip and defiance in her eyes. She'd been beaten, Jacob could see that much, but not broken. Never broken. Jacob dismounted slowly, leaving his rifle in its saddle scabbard. This would be pistol work, close and personal. He walked into the canyon, hands hanging loose at his sides, every sense alert for the trap he knew was coming. "Thornton," Blackwood called, his cultured voice echoing off the stone walls. "I'm impressed. Most men would have brought the cavalry, but you came alone just as I demanded. Very honorable, very foolish." "Let her go," Jacob said, still walking, closing the distance. "Your fight's with me." "My fight is with everyone who thinks they can destroy what I built." Blackwood's voice carried an edge now, the polished veneer cracking. 5 years I spent at San Carlos, 5 years managing savages who don't understand civilization, dealing with incompetent bureaucrats, making difficult choices that kept the peace. And this is my reward? Accusations from an Indian woman? Investigation by soldiers too stupid to understand the complexity of my work? "You stole from children," Jacob said, still walking. 30 yards now. "Sold young girls to brothels, got rich on suffering. Don't dress it up as management. Don't call it complexity. You're a slaver and a thief, and you're going to hang for it." "Am I?" Blackwood's hand moved toward his pistol, not drawing but resting on the grip. "Because from where I stand, I'm the only one walking out of this canyon. You die here, Thornton. Shot while trying to help an Apache fugitive escape. Tragic but necessary. And the woman? Well, accidents happen. She'll die trying to run. No witnesses, no evidence, just my word against no one. Jacob stopped walking. 20 yards separated them now, close enough to see the madness in Blackwood's eyes, the desperate calculation of a man with nothing left to lose. You think you can outdraw me? I think I don't have to. Blackwood smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Jacob had ever seen. I think I have friends you don't know about. Movement from the rocks. Luther Pike stepped into view on the eastern rim, rifle leveled at Jacob's chest. The bounty hunter's face was bruised, his knee obviously still paining him from Kainai's kick days ago, but his rifle was steady. "Should have killed me when you had the chance, mountain man," Pike called down. "Now you die, and I still collect my money." Jacob's mind raced, calculating odds and angles. Pike had the high ground and a rifle. Blackwood had a pistol and position. Kainai was tied and helpless. This was the trap. This was how it ended. Unless— "You made one mistake," Jacob said, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "You assumed I came alone." "Bluffing won't save you," Blackwood said, but doubt flickered in his eyes. "No bluff." Jacob smiled, and it was a predator's expression. "See, I told Hayes and Hendricks where I was going, told them to give me 3 hours, but I also told someone else. Told him last night, just in case something like this happened, and that someone has been watching this canyon since dawn." A shot rang out from the western rim. Pike's rifle flew from his hands, the stock shattered by a bullet fired with impossible accuracy from 300 yards. The bounty hunter dove for cover, cursing. Tom "Red" Sullivan stood up from where he'd been hidden among the rocks, his old Sharps rifle still smoking. "Told you I'd watch your back, Bear," the old prospector shouted. "Now finish this." Everything happened at once. Blackwood drew his pistol, fast and smooth. Jacob drew faster, 5 years of mountain survival honing reflexes that wouldn't quit. 2 shots, so close together they sounded like one. Blackwood's bullet went wide, panic ruining his aim. Jacob's didn't. The heavy slug took Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to the frozen ground. Jacob was already moving, running toward Kainai as Pike recovered and fired from the rocks. The bullet whined past Jacob's ear, close enough to feel the heat. He dove behind the same boulder where Kainai was tied, his knife already out, cutting through her bonds. "You came," she gasped. "You fool, you wonderful fool, you came." "Had to," Jacob said, sawing through the last rope. "Couldn't let you have all the fun." Another shot from Pike, but Red answered it, the boom of his Sharps echoing across the canyon. Then hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, and the bugle call that meant the cavalry was arriving. Captain Hayes led 20 troopers into the canyon at a gallop, surrounding the area with professional efficiency. It was over in minutes. Pike tried to run but was caught before he made 50 yards. Blackwood, bleeding and broken, was placed in irons while a surgeon worked to stop the blood flow. Colonel Hendricks himself read the charges, his voice carrying the weight of military law and righteous anger. "Colonel Silas Blackwood, you are under arrest for theft, trafficking, conspiracy, and murder. You will be transported to Tucson to stand trial. May God have mercy on your soul, because the law will have none." Blackwood looked up from where he knelt in the dirt, his fine uniform stained with blood and mud, all his polish and power stripped away. His eyes found Kainai, and in them was hatred mixed with disbelief. "You're nothing," he said, his voice weak but venomous. "Just a savage. You shouldn't have been able to beat me." Kainai walked over to stand above him, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the canyon for all to hear. "I'm not nothing. I am Chiricahua Apache. I am the voice of every stolen daughter. I am the truth you tried to bury, and I am the reason you will hang." She paused, then added quietly, "Mary Running Deer and 22 others will come home because of this day. That's not nothing. That's everything." 3 months later, spring came to the Mogollon Rim with a gentleness that felt like absolution. The snow melted, revealing meadows full of wildflowers. The creeks ran high and clear. Birds returned from southern migrations, filling the forest with song. Jacob stood outside his cabin, watching as the new addition took shape. He was building a second room, larger than the first, with windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. Red Sullivan hammered at the roof, working with the steady rhythm of a man who'd found purpose in helping others build their futures. A sound made Jacob turn. Kainai emerged from the trees, leading a small group. Sarah Running Deer walked beside her, and behind them came 3 young Apache women recently returned from captivity in Tucson, Mary Running Deer among them. The reunion at Fort Apache had brought tears to eyes that thought they had no more tears to shed, and now Sarah had brought her daughter to see the place that had sheltered the woman who saved her. But there were others too. Father Miguel, coming to bless the new addition, Captain Hayes, taking a few days' leave to see how the story ended, and trailing at the back, shy and uncertain, 6 Apache children whose parents had died and who needed a place to grow up learning both the old ways and new. Kainai reached Jacob, her hand finding his automatically now, the gesture as natural as breathing. "We brought visitors," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "Hope you have enough coffee." Jacob looked at this crowd gathering around his once solitary cabin, at the children already exploring the forest with the fearless curiosity of the young, at the community forming in a place that had known only isolation. "I'll make more," he said. That evening, after food had been shared and stories told, and the visitors had departed or settled in for sleep, Jacob and Kainai sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Kainai leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence. "This isn't what I expected when I pulled you out of that canyon," Jacob said finally. "Thought I was saving one woman. Didn't realize I was starting a family." "Neither did I," Kainai admitted. "But life has a way of surprising us. You taught me that. Taught me that sometimes the trails we don't choose lead us exactly where we need to be." "Where's that?" "Home," she said simply. "Not a place, not a building, but people who matter. Purpose that gives meaning. Love that makes survival worth the effort." She lifted her head to look at him. "This is home, Bear. You and me and everyone who needs shelter. This is where we stop running and start living." Jacob pulled her closer, feeling her warmth against the cooling evening, feeling alive in a way he hadn't felt in 5 years. "Then welcome home, Morning Star. Welcome home." Far to the south, in a Tucson courthouse, Colonel Silas Blackwood received his sentence. The judge's voice was cold and final. Death by hanging for crimes against humanity. Justice, slow but certain, had finally arrived. But here on the Mogollon Rim, justice took a different form. Not vengeance, but restoration. Not punishment, but healing. Children who'd been stolen learned to laugh again. A woman who'd been silenced found her voice. A man who'd been alone discovered that opening his heart to others made him stronger, not weaker. The mountains stood eternal, witness to everything, judging nothing. And under stars that had seen countless human struggles, 2 people who'd been broken by loss discovered they could build something beautiful from the fragments. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and growing and worth fighting for. The end of one story, the beginning of another. And in the space between, the simple truth that hope, courage, and love are worth more than all the gold and power in the world. Because those things can't be stolen, can't be bought, can only be given freely, one heart to another, under skies that promise tomorrow will come, and with it, the chance to choose again who we want to be. Jacob Thornton chose to be a protector. Kainai chose to be a warrior for justice. Together, they chose to be proof that even in the hardest country, in the darkest times, good people can still win if they're willing to stand up and fight. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.